They found them on a Tuesday morning in late September 1963. Two girls' sisters standing barefoot on the edge of County Road 8 just outside Harlan, Kentucky. They weren't crying. They weren't calling for help. They simply stood there, hand in hand, like children waiting for someone who was never going to arrive. A truck driver named Earl Simmons spotted them first. He said they didn't move when his truck rounded the bend, didn't flinch when the brakes hissed. They only stared at him with eyes that looked, according to Earl, like they'd seen something God himself refused to look at. By noon, the whole town knew the Dalton girls had come back, and for a few brief hours, people let themselves believe the story might end there. Two missing girls returned after 11 years, no explanation needed. No questions asked, but it didn't end, because when the girls finally spoke, when they finally opened their mouths and told the sheriff what had happened to them, no one believed a word. Not because their story was impossible, but because it felt too possible. Too close to the bone. Too real for anyone in Harlan to face head dash on dot. It was the kind of truth that forces you to look at your neighbors differently. The kind that makes you realize the monsters you fear at night don't hide under your bed. They sit across from you at the dinner table. They shake your hand in church. They hold the door for you at the general store dot, and sometimes, if you're not careful, they look just like everyone else. August 9th, 1952. Was the kind of day Eastern Kentucky never forgets. Thick heat, cicadas screaming from the treetops, and the sky hanging low and heavy like it was tired of being a sky at all. Margaret Dalton was 14. Her sister Catherine was 10. They lived with their mother, Ruth, in a small clapboard house at the edge of Harlan, a place where the screen door squeaked every time someone breathed on it, and the porch steps sagged just enough to hint at secrets the house had seen but never told. That Saturday morning, Ruth gave them an envelope with 3 crumpled dollars inside and a short list. Eggs, flour, aspirin. Nothing unusual. Nothing dangerous. The walk to town was 2 miles straight down the dusty road, past the abandoned mine entrance, across the 1-lane bridge, then into Harlan's small main street. They'd done it hundreds of times, often without shoes, often laughing the whole way. They left just after 9. By noon, they should have been back, but noon came and went dot at first. Ruth thought maybe they'd stopped to talk to Mrs. Carter, or gotten distracted by the old creek bed where they liked to look for smooth stones. She set the dough to rise, wiped the counters twice, and kept glancing out the window dot by 3. She was on the porch. By 6, she was walking down the road, calling their names. By midnight, she was in the woods behind the house, her voice cracking and raw, shouting for daughters who wouldn't answer. Her flashlight beam shook with every step. The mountains around her stayed silent. The search begins at dawn. The sheriff's department launched a full search. 30 men, bloodhounds, volunteers from 3 counties. They divided into teams, marked off grids, and scoured every inch of the valley. They dragged the creek. They searched the old well near the coal tipple. They knocked on every door, even the ones people avoided. Nothing, got not a footprint, not a scrap of fabric, not one sign of struggle or panic. It was as if the 2 girls had stepped off the edge of the earth. Harlan wasn't a big town, but when children go missing, small towns stretch themselves thin trying to cover the emptiness left behind. People walked the hills until their legs gave out. They brought food to Ruth, sat with her on the porch, prayed with her, cried with her. But every passing hour tightened a knot in her chest. And on the second night, when the searchers returned empty-handed again, Ruth Dalton broke in a way that never fully healed. Rumors in a small towns, have long memories and quick tongues. By the 3rd day, whispers were weaving their way into every kitchen, every store, every church pew. Some said Margaret had run off with an older boy she'd been seen talking to in the spring. Some said Catherine followed her because she didn't know any better. Others muttered about drifters men who passed through in the summer, looking for mining work and trouble, in equal measure. A few of the older folks spoke of things deeper and older than men, stories of shadows in the hollers, creatures that took what didn't belong to them. But they said it quietly, only after dark. Only to people they trusted. Ruth ignored all of it. She knew her daughters. They weren't wild, they weren't reckless, and they wouldn't have run. She clung to one. Truth and one truth only. They were alive. Somewhere. Somehow. Kind of faith that breaks you long before it saves. You. Time moves on without them by the end of the first week. The search slowed. By the end of the second, it stopped entirely. People went back to work. Kids went back to school. The sheriff returned to the usual business of stolen chickens and bar fights, but Ruth never stopped searching. She walked the path to town every morning, retracing their steps. She walked the woods every evening until the shadows swallowed her up. She called their names into the dark long after everyone else stopped listening. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the wind rattled the window panes and the house creaked like it was remembering something, Ruth would sit awake and whisper to herself, "They're out there. I know they are." She was right, but she would spend the next 11 years wishing she, U.S. and single quotes, 11 years is a long time. Long enough for a whole world to change while one family stays frozen. In Harland. The seasons kept turning. The coal dust kept settling. Babies were born. Men died in the mines. Stores opened and closed. And the Dalton house stayed exactly the same. Quiet, waiting. Inside. Ruth Dalton aged like someone who'd forgotten how to breathe properly. Her hair thinned, her hands trembled, and the lines on her face deepened as if each one marked a day. Her daughters didn't come home, but she never touched their shared bedroom. Their dresses stayed folded at the foot of the beds. Their shoes stayed by the door. The drawings Catherine had taped to the wall crooked childlike. Sun-faded hung exactly where she left them. Every night, Ruth set 2 extra plates at the table. She never explained why anymore. She didn't have to. People in Harlan learned not to mention the empty chairs, and every evening at dusk, the same time, the girls had gone missing. Ruth walked to the edge of her yard. She'd stand perfectly still where the grass met the tree line, staring into the dark until the first stars appeared. She wasn't watching the forest. She was waiting. The town forgets Harlan wasn't heartless, but small towns have to move on. Survival requires it. The missing posters faded to white and peeled off the telephone poles like shedding skin. The sheriff's office stored the girls' files in a drawer labeled cold cases. Drawer. No one opened unless they needed paper for the typewriter. New families moved to town. New children went missing in other counties. New tragedies replaced old ones. People remembered the Dalton girls, of course. But in the way you remember a story that doesn't feel real anymore, something that happened to someone else. In another lifetime. Poor Ruth, they'd whisper in the grocery store. She still waits for them. She never did accept the truth. But Ruth wasn't waiting for truth. She was waiting for her daughters, and she refused to believe they were gone. Signs that never were some nights. People claimed they heard things in the hills. A girl's voice. Footsteps. Running. Someone crying. Stories spread like wildfire after the 3rd whiskey bottle at Murphy's Tavern. But nothing ever came of it. The sheriff always chalked it up to foxes, owls, or imagination. Still, some folks swore they saw something once. 2 figures in the forest. Small and pale, moving between trees like ghosts. No footprints were ever found. No evidence. No answers. So, eventually, the sighting stopped too. Timed as I thought it erases even the screams. And then, after 11 years, it was Tuesday, September 24th, 1963. A thick morning mist hugged the hills, and the sky was the color of old dishwater. The world felt strangely quiet, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. At 7:16 a.m. Truck driver Earl Simmons turned onto County Road 8. At 7:17. He slammed on his brakes. 2 girls were standing by the side of the road, barefoot, dirty, holding hands. He recognized them instantly, though he couldn't have explained how. The Dalton sisters had been missing longer than he'd lived in Harland. Yet here they were. As real as the morning air. Margaret, now 25, but looking somehow younger. Catherine, 21. With a hollow stare that made Earl's skin crawl. Their clothes didn't fit. Their hair was tangled. Their faces were pale and unreadable, like masks carved from candle wax. And worst of all, they showed no fear. No relief. No emotion at all. Just two pairs of eyes, empty and bottomless, staring right through him. Earl didn't honk, didn't get out of the truck, didn't speak. He simply reached for his radio with shaking hands. By noon, the whole town buzzed with the impossible news. The Dalton girls had come back, alive. Parents pulled their children close. Old folks crossed themselves. And Ruth, upon hearing the sheriff's knock, collapsed. Before she even reached the door, what no one knew then was that the girls had not come home. Not really. They had simply been released. The sheriff's office wasn't built for a moment like this. Too small, too quiet, too used to handling petty theft, coal camp fights, and the occasional runaway drunk. Yet now it held two girls who had stepped out of time itself. Margaret and Catherine Dalton sat together, shoulders touching, hands entwined so tightly their fingers trembled. They looked less like survivors and more like shadows learning how to exist again. For 3 hours they said nothing. Not to the officers. Not to the doctor. Not even to each other. Their silence felt rehearsed, as if they'd been trained in it. But everything changed the moment the door burst open and Ruth Dalton rushed inside. A mother's collapse. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Ruth dropped to her knees and clutched at her daughter's clothes, her sobs echoing off the green walls. She buried her face against Margaret's lap, fingers trembling, breath shaking. Margaret, Catherine, you're home. You're home. The girls didn't hug her. They didn't cry. They simply watched her. Then, slowly, Margaret lowered her eyes to her mother and whispered the first words she'd spoken in 11 years. We stayed because he told us to. Her tone was flat, cold, practiced. The sheriff exchanged a glance with the deputy. Not fear, not confusion, but something deeper. Something is wrong here. Name of the man who took them. Who told you to stay? The sheriff asked softly. Margaret lifted her head. Thomas. The name hit the room like a dropped glass. Thomas who? Thomas from where? Do you know his last name? Both girls shook their heads at the same time, same angle, same rhythm, like marionettes controlled by the same hand. He found us on the road, Margaret said. He told us Mother was hurt, and that she sent him to bring us home, Catherine added quietly. Ruth closed her eyes. The lie still stung after 11 years? The house in the woods. What happened after he took you? The sheriff asked. The sisters spoke in a strange pattern, finishing each other's thoughts, splitting sentences like they'd rehearsed them, like they'd been taught to speak that way. He brought us to a house, Margaret said. Hidden deep in the hills, Catherine added. So deep the world outside stopped existing, Margaret finished. The house, they explained, had windows boarded from the inside and doors that only opened outward when Thomas decided they would. Time there didn't feel like time. There were no seasons, no days, no clocks. Just rules. So many rules. He said the world had ended, Catherine whispered. That our mother was gone, that he saved us. And we believed him, Margaret added. For years. Ruth covered her mouth, choking on a sob. The room of punishment, they told the sheriff about a small room, too small to lie down in, too small to stand up straight. A room he locked them in when they cried or questioned or remembered too much. It was dark, Margaret said. Always dark. How long did he keep you in there? The sheriff asked. Long enough that we stopped trying to count, Catherine whispered. The deputy stepped out of the room. He needed air. Everyone did. The day he let them go, the sheriff leaned forward. Why now? Why did you leave after 11 years? Margaret looked down at her, and Catherine joined hands. Because he opened the door, she said. Put shoes by the threshold, and told us it was time. Told us to walk east until we found a road, Catherine added. Told us someone would come. And then he kissed us on the forehead, Margaret said. Called us good girls, and walked into the woods. It was the quiet coldness in her tone, not fear, not grief, that made the room shiver. What direction did he go? the sheriff asked. Margaret slowly raised her eyes. All directions, she said, as if the woods belonged to him. The room went silent. The final blow of chapter 4, the sheriff stood, his hands trembling slightly. We're going to find him, he promised. But the girls shook their heads, almost smiling, not with joy, but with the empty certainty you see in people who've survived things you cannot imagine. You won't, Margaret said softly. Because he doesn't live in the woods, Catherine added. He lives in people. Margaret squeezed her sister's hand. And he'll come back when he wants to. Ruth, unable to bear another word, pulled her daughters into her arms and held them as if her embrace could protect them from the memories that still owned them. Outside the window, the sun was setting behind the hills, long shadows stretching like fingers across the ground. In Harland, for the first time in 11 years, the night felt alive.